What happens when loyalty, power, and money collide behind the scenes of a hip-hop business network? This is the case of Dixon versus Cartagena and others, a federal lawsuit filed by Terrance T.A. Dixon, a close collaborator and former hype man who claims he spent over 15 years helping build Fat Joe's business empire, only to be pushed out, underpaid, and silenced. The suit alleges a pattern of manipulation, deception, and threats directly tied to Fat Joe's success. Fat Joe's legal team, led by high-profile attorney Joe Tacopina, has denied all allegations. Tacopina, whose name I love to say and who has represented A$AP Rocky and Meek Mill, described the lawsuit as a blatant act of retaliation, noting it was filed after Fat Joe sued Dixon for defamation. But Dixon has receipts, specifically recorded phone calls that support his claims, captured by Percy Forrest, a Bronx hip-hop manager and longtime friend of Fat Joe. His recordings are transcribed in the complaint and they play a critical role if they are authentic. It bears mentioning Percy Forrest was killed in late 2024, stabbed outside a Queens nightclub. No suspect or motive has been publicly identified. His absence now adds a haunting weight to the story. In Part 1, The Machine That Built Fat Joe, I'll partially walk through the complaint as it's laid out. This will not be read verbatim. The entire lawsuit is 157 pages, so instead, I will summarize the entire complaint in the order it's laid out, highlighting key portions, and separate it into two parts. Before we start, welcome to Mimi Leaks. If you find this kind of content valuable, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss part 2. If you know someone who should see this, share it. Also, this video discusses allegations involving coercion and exploitation, among other sensitive topics. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's get started. This case was filed in federal court, specifically the Southern District of New York, also known as SDNY. Plaintiff Terrance Dixon, or TA, versus defendants Joseph Cartagena, that is Fat Joe, and 3 individual defendants, Pistol Pete Torres, Rich Player Jospitre, and Erica Moriera. The named business entities are Sneaker Addict Touring, Slate, and Roc Nation. Finally, John and Jane Doe's and ABC Corporations. Dixon's claim is defendants violated laws in New York and Florida related to trafficking and racketeering and laws against unjust enrichment, quantum merit, fraudulent concealment and fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and money laundering. The lawsuit stems from a deliberate and sustained campaign in which a celebrity exploited a creative partner through a network of enforcers, associates, and shell companies. Through the use of force, fraud, manipulation, and intimidation, plaintiffs' contributions, foundational to Fat Joe's success and brand, were suppressed, all while defendants were enriched as intended. And then we have the preliminary statement. For more than 16 years, Terrance Dixon, aka TA, worked alongside Fat Joe in multiple roles: lyricist, performer, security aide, and creative partner. Despite shaping the defendant's brand and contributions to major songs, Dixon was denied credit, royalties, and compensation. The complaint says Dixon was psychologically and financially controlled through manipulated travel, withheld support, and threats, tactics used to coerce compliance on and off tour. Enforcers like Pistol Pete and Rich Player allegedly maintained this control through coercion, intimidation, and violence, while Erica Moriera created shell companies and paperwork to hide Dixon's earnings and launder proceeds. Entities like Slate and Sneaker Addict Touring allegedly served as financial fronts. Slate managed hidden royalties, while Sneaker Addict fraudulently obtained federal loans. Roc Nation is accused of helping suppress Dixon's rights, retaliating with a countersuit, and benefiting from a 10% cut of Cartagena's earnings. As an aside, the complaint says Desiree Perez, Roc Nation's CEO, was defrauded when Cartagena diverted side payments behind her back. Together, these parties allegedly enriched themselves off Dixon's work without paying him or crediting his contributions to Fat Joe's brand or catalog. Dixon was allegedly issued inflated W-2s to mask wage theft and expose him to tax risk. An accountant claims records were falsified and large sums of cash, $600,000 and $200,000, were pulled from business accounts without documentation. At UPNYC, Fat Joe's sneaker store, low-wage staff flaunted luxury goods while the business operated largely in undocumented cash, allegedly evidence of laundering. Despite Fat Joe's earning tens of thousands a month in royalties, Dixon saw none of it. At one point, a $30,000 Live Nation check meant for Dixon was allegedly used to pay off Cartagena's IRS debts. These allegations extend to forced acts of intimacy, I guess you could say, coerced, surveyed, and sometimes filmed, described as part of a pattern of dominance and control. These acts allegedly occurred across tours in Miami, Germany, North Carolina, and more, with minors and dancers present. Staff and security stood by. The complaint frames this as a systemic abuse backed by corporate silence. And we're at paragraph 28. Threats via burner accounts, including, quote, "You love your family, right?" were sent to intimidate Dixon, allegedly violating federal statutes on witness tampering and threats. A retaliatory lawsuit was filed by Roc Nation and Cartagena, not to win, but to harass Dixon, drain legal resources, and deter others from speaking out. It's cited as conspiracy to obstruct justice. The complaint also claims defendants submitted backdated contracts and false split sheets to BMI and ASCAP, erasing Dixon's authorship and assigning 100% credit to Fat Joe. Paragraph 37. The result is $600,000 in lost royalties and permanent exclusion from digital and licensing income. These documents allegedly violate wire fraud and record falsification laws. And again, cash withdrawals of $200,000 and $600,000 with no paper trail support broader claims of laundering and tax evasion through nominee entities and foreign sources. The complaint argues that this was not isolated, but a long-running criminal enterprise under RICO, meeting both closed and open-ended continuity through repeated fraud and intimidation, which brings us to jurisdiction and venue. The court has jurisdiction over the case based on federal law claims under Trafficking Victims Protection Act and RICO, as well as related state law claims. Personal jurisdiction is established over all defendants due to their substantial business transactions within the jurisdiction. The venue of SDNY is proper, as a substantial portion of the predicate acts and wrongful conduct occurred there. Defendants also maintained significant business operations within the district. That brings us to parties. The plaintiff is Terrance Dixon, professionally known as TA, and he is a New York resident who worked with Fat Joe from 2005 through 2020. His roles spanned performance, songwriting, vocals, tour logistics, and security. Despite this range, Dixon claims he was never properly credited or compensated for his foundational contributions. Defendants. First, Joseph Antonio Cartagena, widely known as Fat Joe, is a Miami-based rapper and music executive affiliated with labels like Atlantic Records and Terror Squad. According to the complaint, Cartagena exercised full control over Dixon's professional output while excluding him from royalties, credits, and authorship, even on songs Dixon claims to have co-written, like Congratulations, Ice Cream, and Crack House. These works appeared on albums such as Jose 2, The Dark Side Volume 1, and Elephant in the Room. Pistol Pete Torres is described as Cartagena's enforcer and street-level captain. He allegedly issued violent threats and orchestrated physical retaliation to maintain internal control, targeting Dixon and others who disrupted the enterprise. His involvement is supported by audio recordings and coded language allegedly used to plan an ambush. Richard Rich Player Jospitre served as Cartagena's business manager and a top operative. He allegedly maintained threats and retaliation, documented through phone recordings directed at Dixon and others. His role bridged both financial oversight and enforcement. Erica Juliana Morieta is a Florida resident and is accused of unlawfully acting as legal counsel while creating shell corporations to help the enterprise conceal stolen income and launder funds. Her actions allegedly enabled the diversion of royalties and obstructed Dixon's legal recourse. Sneaker Addict Touring is a Florida company tied to Cartagena, allegedly obtained PPP loans under false pretenses. The complaint claims the business misrepresented its operations to secure financial relief, diverting the funds into the enterprise. Slate, another Florida entity, functioned as the financial backbone of the enterprise. Using shell companies and entities like Belidat LLC and R4 So Valid LLC, Slate allegedly moved money generated from uncredited music and laundered the proceeds. Rock Nation, a Delaware company with its headquarters in New York, is named as Cartagena's current management firm. It allegedly took over his publishing rights in 2017 and receives 10% of his income. The complaint claims Rock Nation jointly employed Dixon, directed his work, and helped divert his royalties, and retaliated against him via a countersuit. The John and Jane Doe defendants are unnamed individuals, possibly managers, agents, accountants, or staff who allegedly helped carry out or conceal the wrongdoing. Finally, ABC corporations 1 through 10 refer to unidentified business entities that are tied to the scheme. These may have held or funneled income, issued false credits, or helped erase Dixon's authorship. The complaint reserves the right to identify them after further investigation. Tolling of the statute of limitations and discovery rule. Dixon alleges that Fat Joe actively hid critical information like royalties, royalty entitlements, credits, and contract terms throughout their working relationship. He didn't learn the full extent of the fraud until 2024 through a former manager and an insider accountant. Through their 16-year partnership, Dixon was told repeatedly that he'd be taken care of, delaying any reason to investigate further. Under New York law, such concealment justifies tolling under statute of limitations until discovery, a principle recognized by courts when there's a power imbalance, as there is here. Dixon filed this complaint within 2 years of uncovering the fraud, making his claims timely. The same logic applies under federal law, and based on these grounds, the complaint argues all claims are timely and should proceed. In order to make sense of the background, I had to make it 2 parts. So today is part 1, and it focuses on the machine that built Fat Joe. It has 3 chapters. And part 2 will focus on the machine that protected him. Chapter 1, Contributions and Creative Erasure. From 2005 through 2022, Terrance Dixon, professionally known as TA, worked in close partnership with Fat Joe and key members of the Cartagena enterprise, including Pistol Pete, Rich Player, Erica Morieta, and affiliated companies like Rock Nation, Slate, and Sneaker Addict Touring. Over 16 years, he contributed to creative output, stage shows, branding, and logistics that helped build a multi-million-dollar persona. There was no contract, no job title, no formal compensation. The arrangement was structured to extract labor while denying Dixon the financial and reputational benefits of his work. His role extended far beyond that of a hype man. He wrote lyrics, structured hooks, and recorded background vocals used on released tracks. He performed at more than 200 live shows, managed travel logistics, acted as bodyguard, and handled emergencies. He also contributed to branding strategies and studio concepts that shaped entire albums. The enterprise profited from all of it. Dixon's labor, voice, and presence were monetized, but he was excluded from royalties, publishing rights, and back-end profits. Credit was withheld, Contracts were never offered. His name was left off of paperwork. The structure ensured that creative and financial control remained solely with Fat Joe and his affiliates. As mentioned in paragraph 84, plaintiffs' unrecognized and unpaid labor thus became the silent foundation of defendant Cartagena's commercial success, leaving plaintiff economically disadvantaged and professionally invisible. Chapter 2: Fraud and Deception. For over a decade, Dixon helped shape the sound of Fat Joe's catalog, contributing lyrics, melodies, and background vocals to dozens of tracks. His voice and ideas are embedded in albums like Jose 2, The Dark Side Volume 1, and Elephant in the Room. But when the credits rolled, his name was nowhere to be found. He was promised 15% ownership of every tract he worked on, 15% of the gross earnings, and formal letters of direction to secure his royalties. Trusting those promises, he kept writing, recording, and performing, believing his work would eventually speak for itself. No letters were issued, no royalties were paid. Dixon was never registered with a single performing rights organization. Despite his voice being on the records, he never saw a single dollar. The money was redirected elsewhere. In 2024, he uncovered the paper trail, falsified and backdated split sheets that erased his authorship. These ghost contracts reassigned full publishing rights to Fat Joe and his companies. Dixon was cut out of the revenue and the record. The filings weren't accidental, they were strategic. Submitted after music dropped, they rewrote history to make it look like Dixon was never there. The royalties followed the paperwork. It wasn't until insiders came forward, including an accountant, that Dixon saw the full scope of what had been done. Roc Nation had taken over management in 2017. They controlled the catalog, oversaw the money, and took a 10% cut of all revenue. Dixon reported directly to Roc Nation and their appointed director. He wasn't just working for Fat Joe, he was working inside a system that knew exactly what it was doing. And according to paragraph 104, as of the filing of this complaint, plaintiff remains wholly excluded from every royalty stream tied to the songs he helped create. His professional identity as a lyricist and co-author has been suppressed in service of defendants' economic domination and the maintenance of a fraudulent authorship narrative. Dixon's underpayment extended beyond the studio. Performance contracts routinely allocated $3,000 per show for his role as a hype man and creative stage presence. Instead, he was handed $250 in cash, off the books, undocumented. In one case, a $30,000 payment from Live Nation was allegedly used to pay off Fat Joe's personal IRS debt. Behind the scenes, Dixon's tax records were manipulated. His accountant was allegedly instructed to inflate W-2s to make it appear he had been paid properly. Meanwhile, Dixon was denied access to contracts, financial records, and even his daily per diem, $100, meant to cover food and lodging. Over 200 shows, missing per diems added up to more than $60,000. Dixon often paid out of pocket, slept in unsafe motels, or waited in airports with no accommodations. Meanwhile, Fat Joe and his entourage flew first class, stayed in luxury hotels, and dined lavishly on money Dixon never saw. Defendants maintained this inequality to reinforce his vulnerability and dependency, and to ensure silence and compliance. Corporate entities facilitated and profited through unlawful diversions of what was rightfully the plaintiff's, with the help of financial structuring and accounting practices overseen by defendant accountant Doe. Defendants concealed everything. As paragraph 120 states, the deliberate and systematic financial exploitation represents a coordinated effort and pattern of fraud, theft, and economic coercion that substantially enriched defendant Cartagena and his associates at plaintiff's direct expense, causing plaintiff to sustain financial harm, economic vulnerability, and emotional distress. Now let's move into Chapter 3, which is Control and Coercion, according to my chapters. The control wasn't just financial. For 16 years, Dixon lived under a system of psychological pressure, intimidation, and fear. Fat Joe didn't just demand loyalty, he enforced it. Fat Joe reinforced his threats with examples. Dixon was reminded of what happened to others who stepped out of line, like Cuban Link, who was attacked, scarred, and publicly humiliated after a falling out of favor. These were messages, not memories. Any act of resistance, disloyalty, or demand for fair treatment came with the risk of violence, disgrace, or professional ruin. Over time, fear became routine, and the longer he stayed, the harder it became to imagine a way out. The conditions were designed to break him. Verbal abuse, threats, withheld payments, and chaotic travel kept Dixon off balance. He was denied stability. On multiple occasions, he says he was left stranded in foreign cities, without food, shelter, or a way home. The message was simple. He could be discarded at any time, and no one was coming to help. Fat Joe used past violence as leverage, particularly as he kept referencing the attack on Cuban Link to create an immediate sense of threat. The constant fear and pressure took a significant toll on Dixon's well-being. Over 16 years of intimidation, isolation, and emotional manipulation left him with lasting trauma, including panic, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. The impact of this was not solely emotional, it was a strategic form of control. Every warning and moment of humiliation sent a clear message: stay in line or risk losing everything. As stated in paragraph 131, plaintiff was not only exploited financially, but also subjected to a wide spectrum of coercive control, including forced compliance under observation, surveillance-based humiliation, and repeated psychological pressure, tactics designed to erode his autonomy and ensure silence. Dixon's autonomy was systematically dismantled. He was placed in situations orchestrated to degrade and control. Scenarios arranged by Fat Joe, like those involving acts to be performed with random women brought by Fat Joe to hotel rooms. These often followed performances or studio sessions. The encounters were planned, observed closely, recorded, and directed. Dixon says he didn't participate by choice. He complied out of fear of being cut off financially, left behind in foreign cities, or targeted for retaliation. The threat was always present, and the cost of saying no was never left to the imagination. After one refusal, Dixon says his return flight was canceled. He was left abroad without money, shelter, or support. These scenarios were part of a system designed to reinforce obedience through fear, humiliation, and dependency. Compliance became a condition of Dixon's continued employment, and access to basic needs and human dignity had to be earned. This scenario is textbook of cases of trafficking by coercion. Dixon says these encounters were never about choice. Each one carried the same message: refuse and everything disappears. Over 16 years, he estimates, he was coerced into more than 4,000 such acts. Each one reinforced the unequal power dynamic. Dixon was repeatedly degraded in front of others. Approval, at this point, felt like survival. The psychological toll was lasting. Dixon says he now lives with symptoms consistent with PTSD and remains in trauma-informed therapy and continues to experience debilitating anxiety. Members of the enterprise witnessed and participated in the coercive dynamics that shaped Dixon's daily life. Roc Nation took over management in 2017, and due to their access, they had every opportunity to intervene. Instead, they benefited, earning commissions, royalties, and influence while Dixon stayed silent. As paragraph 145 says, the retaliatory lawsuit was intended not to prevail on legal merit, but to create public confusion, burden plaintiffs' counsel with discovery costs, and dissuade other victims and whistleblowers from coming forward with evidence of defendants' enterprise activity. If Part 2 is the machine that protected Fat Joe, then Chapter 4 could be looked at as the calibration chamber, where victims are broken and conditioned into compliance. Based on the complaint, defendant Cartagena gained control through the use of fear. Control extended beyond money, it shaped language. When Dixon asked what "no one exits terror squad in one piece" meant, Cartagena would reference Cuban Link, a former artist and friend who was slashed across the face and left permanently scarred. This served as a warning that leaving came at a cost. Do not cross Fat Joe or end up like Cuban Link. Threats like these deprived plaintiff of free agency and reinforced defendant's control. Dixon was coerced into public acts of exhibitionism, framed as loyalty tests. These occurred in Cartagena-controlled spaces, hotel rooms, studios, where Dixon was ordered to engage with women while Cartagena watched, while he recorded or gave commands. In Miami, after a concert, Cartagena brought a woman to his suite and ordered Dixon to sleep with her in front of the group. Enterprise members like Pistol Pete watched and laughed. Dixon complied under threat of lost income, tour removal, or public humiliation. When Dixon resisted, retaliation followed: withheld pay, canceled travel, threats of being abandoned abroad. Roc Nation, which assumed management in 2017, either knew or should have known. These incidents occurred at venues under their oversight, yet no audits or discipline followed. Royalties and commissions continued. These acts violate the Trafficking Act, Civil Rights Acts, and RICO, and each incident reinforced the enterprise's control and inflicted lasting psychological harm. Dixon remains in treatment. The pattern mirrors known trafficking prosecutions. Coercion, fraud, and power were used to extract compliance and suppress resistance. The goal? Total control. The enterprise used coded language as well. They would do that to issue threats and to continue violence. The complaint lists 10 examples, including the Don, or Fat Joe, Ketchup, which meant slashing, or payops, meant coerced intimacy, among others. These terms appeared in texts, studio talk, and back channels, and reinforced hierarchy and masked criminal acts. Dixon says he witnessed Cartagena engage in illegal acts with minors, which is talked about in this next section. Girls aged 15 and 16. Minor Doe 1, a 16-year-old Dominican girl in New York, performed acts in exchange for cash, clothes, and phone payments. Dixon once begged Cartagena to pay her phone bill, which was under $100. Minor Doe 2, a 15-year-old non-citizen, began a relationship with Cartagena after an overseas concert. He flew her to New York and Miami and paid for a Brazilian butt lift. Later, she married a professional athlete. Minor number 3 met Cartagena at 15. He paid her bills, took her on tour, and housed her near his marital home. Dixon says Cartagena was infatuated and considered leaving his wife. In a recorded conversation, Minor Doe 3 and her cousin described his behavior as inappropriate. Fat Joe would reference these dynamics in his music. In She's My Mama, he raps about a 16-year-old and also talks about oral acts and trafficking substances through her. Minor Doe 3 confirmed that the lyrics reflect their relationship. She was also required to carry jewelry while traveling with him. Dixon also describes a cover-up involving K. Rose, a 15-year-old artist signed to Dre of Cool and Dre. Dre allegedly had intercourse with her in the studio. When her parents found out, she panicked. He panicked. Everybody panicked. Dixon says Cartagena calmed down and used a burner phone to contact the family. Her career ended shortly after. That brings us to Chapter 5, the Armor Circuit, and the theme could be described as power under the guise of political connections, but with real street enforcers from Cartagena's protective shell. After Dixon began disclosing the enterprise's coercive and criminal conduct, senior members launched a coordinated retaliation campaign. Pistol Pete and Rich Player contacted mutual associate, the late Percy Forrest, to set up a violent confrontation which was intended to punish Dixon and deter future disclosures. Pistol Pete, who's Cartagena's longtime enforcer, pressures Forrest to help set up Dixon. Pete insists Dixon can't return to the neighborhood and implies retaliation is expected. Percy refuses. He pushes back, saying he won't line up someone who was once family. The call then escalates. Pete accuses Dixon of betrayal and claims he's owed money. Percy defends Dixon and draws a hard line. He says, "Don't ever tell me bring so-and-so to you. I'm not ever doing that." The call captures the enterprise's internal codes of loyalty, intimidation, and enforced silence. In a second call, Rich Player, Fat Joe's manager, tells Percy that the situation has gotten out of hand. It's gone too far. From how the transcript reads, it appears Rich Player and Percy had a misunderstanding in their efforts, or Rich Player, at least, had a From how the transcript reads, it appears that Rich Player is trying to talk to Percy about their misunderstanding in their efforts perhaps to smooth things over, but also to convince Percy to take care of TA, or Dixon. And here's where we'll get into political cover, so to speak. Using a burner account, Cartagena claimed to have connections in the White House. While likely exaggerated, he did assist with White House community outreach. He met one-on-one with then VP Harris and moderated a criminal justice panel alongside of her, bringing Rich Player to the event. Publicly a reform candidate, Cartagena was privately orchestrating retaliation. Cartagena flaunted ties, however trivial or small, to former presidents and high-ranking officials. He gifted President Clinton sneakers branded with his RICO enterprise and received the key to NYC from Mayor Eric Adams. Online, he boasted he doesn't need to lift a finger, a veiled threat that Dixon interpreted as a murder plot. Messages from Cartagena's alleged burner account show him threatening bodily harm, warning Dixon to watch his back, and claiming he has opportunities to harm or spare him. He escalates even further than that in other text messages, threatening Dixon's family, most of whom live in the Bronx. In another message, he brags about strong-arming a YouTuber to suppress Dixon's statements. Several YouTubers confirmed receiving threats from the enterprise. Cartagena also attempts to lure Dixon to his business, UPNYC, taunting him, seemingly trying to isolate him. Another message that stands out is, quote, "At some point, everyone is by themselves," which seems to be a chilling reminder of vulnerability. Couch surfer is another term that Cartagena uses to mock Dixon in YouTube videos, further linking him to the burner account. He reminds Dixon of the consequences of being cut from Terror Squad in another message, a threat Dixon interpreted as a warning of physical harm. Pistol Pete, who once told Percy that nobody is going to stab the plaintiff, appears here under the burner name Pablo Escobar, promising to give Dixon a $1.50, which is slang for slashing. Pete used multiple burner accounts and, with brazen stupidity, confirmed their use on screen. He warns Dixon that he has 48 hours to fall back, perceived as a death threat. Pete declares that nothing will stop the enterprise from eating, and now Dixon is food, another death threat. Cartagena caps the campaign with, "Don't you think people gotta be made an example of so others will understand not to cross?" Dixon took this as a guarantee of harm. These threats mirror Enterprise's history of violent enforcement. Incidents include the stabbing of a rival, Ketchup, and a redacted altercation involving the boyfriend of Fat Joe's children's mother. Dixon confronted Cartagena about the latter via Instagram. Cartagena never denied the insinuation. These and other redacted beatings at his behest constitute violations of federal and state law and fit the profile of racketeering. The enterprise's use of violence to silence Dixon violated anti-trafficking laws. Percy's refusal and his recordings now serve as direct evidence of a coordinated hierarchical plot to harm Dixon, confirming the structure, intent, and continuity required under RICO. And this is where we get to Chapter 6, the Encrypted Loop, because the theme is repeated, coded threats used to condition and control. And first, we talk about the encrypted channels. Cartagena used a burner phone ending in 1330 for secret communications, including with underage girls. Dixon witnessed him using it in hotels and tour buses to arrange private meetings and travel for intimate encounters, some involving minors. The burner also facilitated drug and firearm logistics and communication with enforcers, It was deliberately isolated to avoid GPS tracking, subpoenas, and law enforcement detection, forming a closed loop of trusted criminal contacts. Cartagena's use of encrypted, disposable phones mirror organized crime tactics. Dixon believes telecom records will expose trafficking threats and conspiracy, further proving the enterprise's structure, continuity, and criminal purpose. Cartagena used coded language like "give him ketchup" to order violent retaliation. Violence was normalized within the enterprise as a tool for control. Cafe Ketchup originated from a retaliatory stabbing after an enterprise member had lost a fight. Cartagena allegedly ordered the attack to reassert dominance. In another case, Cartagena orchestrated violence but had someone else serve prison time, reinforcing loyalty and shielding himself. After a Latin rapper allegedly disrespected him online, the artist was assaulted. Dixon recalls Cartagena's smug reaction, implying involvement. The message was clear: challenge him and violence follows. Cartagena ordered Dixon and others to assault rapper Mac Main over a personal insult. The directive was explicit: attack on sight. The insult, which is shown on screen, was seen as crossing a line. Pound him out was understood as mandatory. Non-compliance risked punishment. The Mac Main directive exemplifies how Cartagena used violence to protect his image and assert dominance. These acts constitute criminal solicitation and reinforce the enterprise's structure and continuity. The burner phone resurfaces here, tying together trafficking, communication with underage girls, and violent directives. Dixon personally witnessed its use in coordinating enterprise activities. And here we'll talk about some witness retaliation, as when Pistol Pete and Rich Player initiated efforts to set Dixon up for assault or execution, they called Percy, who recorded the calls. These recordings, as we have heard, now serve as primary evidence of a conspiracy to commit witness retaliation and obstruction, violating laws in New York, Florida, and federally. The transcripts show retaliatory violence was institutional. There was an attempted assault as well. In Miami, Cartagena ordered Dixon and another associate to confront and potentially shoot rapper DMX after a verbal dispute. Take the hammer was understood as authorization to use a firearm. Dixon diffused the situation, but within the enterprise, it was a different story. Directives from Cartagena were treated as mandatory. The order supports multiple racketeering charges, including attempted assault and criminal solicitation across state lines. These were not isolated incidents. Cartagena routinely used trusted subordinates to carry out strategic violence to protect his image and assert dominance, including an alleged plot targeting 50 Cent, to be discussed in the counts section. Crime as branding and public boasting is the next theme of this little subsection or chapter. In 2012, Fat Joe pleaded guilty to failing to file federal tax returns despite earning over $3.7 million. He served time, paid fines, and later released an album with a cover styled like a federal interrogation room. The moment became a badge of honor, signaling that rules do not apply. That mindset shaped the enterprise's playbook: hide the money, dodge accountability, and treat criminal exposure as branding. In a May 25, 2025 YouTube interview, Pistol Pete proudly described orchestrating a racially charged or targeted prison riot where multiple Black inmates were stabbed. He showed no remorse. The interview aired on a channel linked to Pete, Cartagena, and Rich Player. Next is Chapter 7, The Engine Room, which is where the enterprise's core mechanisms are exposed as machinery driving this whole sustained criminal operations. A chart of predicate acts is introduced in the complaint, and each one is tied to a federal statute. The table is on the next several pages, and it stamps out the acts, but we've already walked through it with its statutes, so I'm going to skip it. Moving on, the enterprise is defined as a coordinated network of individuals and entities acting in concert. Rock Nation, Slate, Sneaker Addict Touring, and others are named as active participants. Their roles span concealment, laundering, and retaliation. After his release from federal custody, Cartagena resumed deceptive financial practices. He fabricated business deductions, backdated invoices, and also created false employee records, as well as collected unreported cash from overseas performances. His prior conviction confirms awareness of tax obligations. Resuming similar conduct shows intent, supporting a pattern under federal RICO statutes. Since 2005, Cartagena has managed a criminal network involving enforcers, financial operatives, shell companies, and industry partners. Its public face, Terror Squad, UPNYC, and related ventures masked a private operation built to enrich Cartagena through coercion, fraud, and concealment. The structure operated across sectors, unified by intent and deception. Whether by chance or by design, this table shows just how the enterprise was structured and how it meets federal definitions and characteristics of a RICO enterprise. The enterprise's leader, Cartagena, sits at the top. He directs operations, issues orders, and controls the flow of money, threats, and retaliation. Every layer beneath him moves in service of his enrichment. Under enterprise management and facilitation sits Erica Juliana Moriera, and she acts as an unauthorized legal representative, filing fraudulent documents and forming shell companies to hide enterprise funds. Arzaya Cartagena, Fat Joe's daughter, holds nominal ownership of entities like Azaria LLC, concealing her father's control and helping evade financial liabilities. Financial operations and money laundering network entities include Slate, who serves as the main financial conduit for laundering enterprise funds. Subsidiaries like Belidat, Woo Inc., and R4 So Valid form a layered network to obscure transactions. Azaria LLC masks Cartagena's ownership. Sneaker Addict Touring LLC received PPP funds despite lacking operations, and Domo LLC facilitates additional illicit transfers. Those responsible for enforcement and security are Pistol Pete, who leads retaliatory efforts, coordinates assaults and beatings, while reporting directly to Cartagena. Rich Player oversees threats, messaging, and laundering. Enforcers Doe 1 and 2 execute surveillance and intimidation. Street crew members JB, Raul, and AK engage in trafficking, rival coercion, and manipulation through UPNYC. Under enterprise logistics and operational support, Driver Doe manages covert transportation of victims, cash, and contraband across regions. Agent Doe books travel, airlines, charters, hotel stays, and coordinates discreet movement, including of minors. Both maintain operational secrecy and protect the enterprise's mobility from scrutiny. Last, we have UPNYC, the store, and its own subsection, the Enterprise Retail Front and Cash Transaction Hub. UPNYC store employees, through frontline retail, facilitated credit card fraud and unauthorized resale, and also served as a shell front for laundering illegal profits. The store blended unrecorded retail income and wage theft proceeds with legitimate sales in order to disguise and launder as illicit enterprise cash through routine transactions. I'm getting tongue-tied here. Okay. UPNYC performed financial concealment and fraud by falsifying financial records to conceal true income, evade taxes, and misrepresent wages, helping the enterprise hide profits and avoid regulatory scrutiny. It also served as a venue for trafficking and enterprise meetings, as a base for recruiting victims, planning attacks, and hosting coordination meetings among enterprise members. Additionally, UPNYC transferred funds and data among shell entities like Belidat and Woo Inc. to facilitate laundering and preserve enterprise continuity. And like Sneaker Addict Touring, they also took advantage of what was a pandemic-era loan in acquiring PPP money. They did so through exaggerating their payroll obligations and misrepresenting their financial hardships and operational scope. The table illustrates how each member of the Cartagena enterprise and, as a whole, qualifies as a racketeering enterprise in federal law. Next, the complaint provides examples of behavior representative of a racketeering enterprise, which we've discussed earlier. As a quick reminder, some examples of enforcement include Cartagena's instructed teens to attack a Miami man, and both teenagers were fatally shot. Their deaths reflect his coercive use of violence and loyalty enforcement. Cafe Ketchup, a retaliatory stabbing involving Enterprise member JB, the Sing Sing incident, which involved someone's life in prison sentence for another murder, Cartagena's use of coded terms like mantonden or mantonden, retaliation attempts against plaintiff, as demonstrated in the recorded call transcripts, and illicit communication and burner phone use. These statements show the Cartagena enterprise functioned with intent, coordination, and concealment, consistent with RICO enterprises. This last part of the chapter will go over Fat Joe's previous conviction and thus his knowledge and intent in racketeering. Cartagena was convicted in 2012 after pleading guilty to 2 counts of willfully failing to file tax returns, despite earning $3.7 million in the time period investigated. He was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, fined $15,000, and ordered to repay back taxes, totaling over $718,000, showing intent to conceal enterprise income. Cartagena glorified his tax conviction, turning it into a branding opportunity through his music, and boasted about it to others, saying the feds could never touch him. This bravado and overall attitude normalizes criminality and confirms the enterprise's criminal pattern. Defendant's behavior satisfies the pattern element defined in federal racketeering laws, as his past offenses support continuity, and the ongoing concealment ensures it's still active. Next time, I will wrap all of this up going over the causes of action or legal grounds in which the plaintiff is suing based on the defendant's violations of rights and laws. That wraps this video and the factual allegations the plaintiff has made against Fat Joe and other named defendants. We have one more video in the series which will take on the causes of action. We'll connect the dots between the claims and the actual legal violations. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for sticking with us. Please like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you're the first to catch what's next. See you next time and stay safe.